This is WPSL Port St. Lucie.
Time right now, 10:07 Friday morning, and you're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz, Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And it is another beautiful Friday morning. It's interesting how many beautiful Fridays we have. We really do have nice weather.
Fridays are always a little more beautiful than the rest of the day.
It seems like it. You know, we're getting the week is getting ready for Shabbat, so that we can sit back and relax and now we're into that period. Purim is coming to a close, the celebrations of the festival of Esther, and we're moving toward Pesach or Passover, the festival of flatbread. It really is. It's the festival of matzah. It's actually got three names. It's called, the festival of Pesach, which is the Paschal Lamb, of the matzah, which is the unleavened bread, and Zman Cherutzenu, the time of our liberation. Those are the three themes. And one of the big things that I've been thinking about is how different the celebration is than many Christians think it is. And that's just speaks to some of the differences between Judaism and Christianity. I'm going to be actually giving a talk this week in the Riverland area on who is a Jew. That's just one of the things coming up. But we also are going to be having a community Seder, certainly on first night, and if there's enough interest as well, on second night. And so please contact us. It should be live on the website shortly. The website needs to be updated. But we'll have it as both an event on Facebook and on the website. Other things coming up this Friday tonight is Dress Up Shabbat. We're going to say goodbye to Purim with one last fling, if you will. Purim is a dress-up, mix-up, upside-down spring festival, cabin fever kind of holiday. And once we put that to bed, my personal theory is that that's to help you use up all of the baking goods in the house so that you can get ready for Passover. Because one of the big things about Passover is that you're not to have old flour or anything of old flour in your home. And that flour includes wheat, spelt, rye, barley, and oats. Things that can rise when they sit around too long or actually get a bacteria that's even worse. And I think that's the reason, because in Egypt, right before the exit, it had been a horrible year, and they had been forced to use the old wheat because in most of Egypt, it's a crop failure, is what the story is. There's water that doesn't irrigate the fields. Can't drink it because it's got this algae bloom. Imagine algae bloom. Yeah, this reddish algae bloom going on. And hi, Sharon. And that makes the crops meager, and then we've got frogs, and we've got all kinds of things. And then there's a big hailstorm that comes. And then the line that's in scriptures is so sad. What the hail did not damage, the locusts ate. So there's a total crop failure. That sets the scene for what will be the death of the firstborn, and that's because there is a toxin that grows with wheat when it's stored underground and gets damp, which with all of those conditions, it probably did. It probably did. And why the firstborn? Because the firstborn gets a double cut off the top. That means a double portion. So that would have come out of the most toxic part of the stored wheat. And it probably was considered very mysterious. There's probably a natural explanation underneath many of the miracles that we hear about. They're just people's recollections of what it was. The timing, of course, is always essential, and that's a big part. That's how we almost missed the parting of the seas. Cecil B. DeMille notwithstanding, as I often talk with my congregation, it's not the rod that split the sea. If you read the text, it's the east wind that blew all night. And again, living in Florida, we certainly know what an east wind can blow out and apart. and create dry land where there had been reed seas. It's not the Red Sea, folks. There's a huge difference in Hebrew between Yam Adom, which is the Red Sea, and Yam Suf, the Reed Sea that we see in marshes where there is now a Suez Canal. So you can't go there, and it's not easy to walk across the Suez Canal. Anybody who's been in the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, is similar. Getting you through what had been a land connection between Africa and Asia is now the canal. So they broke through it so that ships didn't have to go all the way down around the south tip of Africa in order to get from Asia to Europe. It's part of why they used to have a land-sea kind of distribution on the old Silk Road. There's that Silk Road again. Yeah. Keeps going back there. And so if you read the text, it says that the wind blew all night. So what is Moses doing with his rod? He's pointing the way. He's trying to get the people to stop staring at the problem, the Egyptians, who are noisily coming behind, and the path to freedom. And so that's the big theme. If you... That is the theme of Passover. It's being free. It's no longer being a slave, but remembering what it is to be oppressed. It's a religious charge to remember you were once a slave in Egypt. Don't let others slide into that. Now, it's not the model of slavery that America had for African natives. It was a more like the undocumented worker that we have today, and there was it just was a different kind of setup, but it still was very oppressive, and it was people taking advantage of others and not being fair. Life is seldom fair. That's very true. That doesn't mean that it's okay for you or me to be unfair to others. And that's part of the teaching. The other thing that we are reminded, and I talk about this often, that last week it was the Torah portion that said, remember, blot out the memory of Amalek from among your people. That's a big theme inside Purim, because if people had taken care of each other, then Amalek would never have been a problem. Amalek is the people who prey on the stragglers, those who are left behind, the ostracized, the marginalized, the folks that don't have the community coming around them. If the community were around them, they wouldn't have been easy prey for the Amaleks of the world. And I think that people sometimes miss it. It's not about getting out there and killing each other. It's about protecting each other. It's about recognizing that human beings are all human beings. We all have inalienable rights and gifts from our Creator. We are all human. We are all God's children. And that doesn't mean don't protect ourselves from people who don't know how to behave in society. We need to do that. We also need to find a way to help those people who are lacking in skills gain the skills they need in order to be contributing members. And that doesn't mean doing what we want. It means doing what society needs. And that's a huge shift for some people. There are not... I get it that folks like Plato really thought that there were people who were intelligent and then there were almost humans. And, of course, that gets even worse under Aristotle, who talks about all kinds of non-formed humans, segregates himself into a special group, the haves. And haves are not inherently better, they're just luckier. Lucky by birth, perhaps, lucky by circumstance, lucky by opportunity. And, yes, you do have to work, but if hard work was the only thing it took, we'd have a lot more wealthy, privileged people in the world than we do right now. So it's not just about hard work. There is an element of luck in there. And so if there's luck, then we need to treat each other much more kindly, much more gently than we do. And that's the point of saying, remember Amalek, to blot it out. And remember, you were once oppressed. You know what it feels like to be on the short end of the stick, to not have enough. And so use that in dealing with others. and treat each other with dignity, with love. This is another piece. It comes out of the book of Leviticus. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Comes right out of the middle of the book of Leviticus, which typically gets a bad rap because it has a whole lot of laws in it and things like that. A lot of instructions, many of which are not well understood. They really aren't. And that's unfortunate. I can remember sitting in Tucson in a conference with rabbis and other community leaders. We had a day of exploration, and we were looking at some of the texts, and there's a line in there that is usually translated as "don't lie with a woman as you would with a man." That's not what the text says. It says, "Don't do the sex bed, the intimate bed, the intimacy with a male either." A little different, because it talks about improper revealing of private matters among female relations in all of the text before. And if you don't read that, you don't understand that last injunction. It's not about sex, it's about intimacy. It's about airing dirty laundry. And I know I've talked about that many times, so I'm not going to talk about that aspect today. But it's interesting how things like that get misinterpreted, mistranslated over time, and then backwash into people's readings of it. But the instruction to love your neighbor comes out of that same book. And if you love your neighbor, what does that mean? It doesn't mean forcing your neighbor to do what you want to do. It's about not forcing your neighbor in any way that you would not want to be forced. And yes, I flip that into the negative, not because it's negative, but because the negative is more liberating. It's not about imposing my will. It's about, or you about yours. It's about not forcing somebody to do something that you wouldn't want somebody to, in the same areas where you wouldn't want somebody to press you. And that golden rule is throughout all religions. It's a very universal thing. What is hateful to you, do not do to another. That also comes out of that same book. So there's lots of instructions about how to live together. The other one that I always find it interesting when people say that Jesus didn't lay down these principles. He taught them because they come out of the book of Leviticus, and the other one that's usually in that lump is out of the book of Deuteronomy, which is to love God with all of your heart and your soul and your moreness, your might, all of your power, all of your influence. I love that word. It's me'odecha, your moreness. So it's all the things that you don't directly control, but all those things over which you have influence. Those things that go beyond you. The first two are you, your heart, that's you, with all of your being, and then all of your might, all of your strength, is the power that you have, the people that you directly control or govern, and then me'odecha, the folks that are not within your immediate circle, but for whom you have some influence. And the instruction is not to force taxes, it's not to force obedience per se, it's to invite love. And love is a really interesting emotion. You cannot command somebody to do it. The most you can do is inspire, model, invite. It is the emotion of free will. It is freely given. And it means wanting the best for all concerned, for the object of your love. I like to point out to people an example of love is the feeling that a parent typically has for their child when it's first born. It hasn't done anything other than exist. That's the sole thing that it's done. And just by doing that much, it is the recipient of so much love and such powerful connection between the parents and God in this miracle of life. And it's a miracle, it's a gift. None of us knows how many minutes, hours, days we're going to have, years, God willing. Right? But it doesn't always work that way. And that doesn't mean that a life is not full. We just don't understand all of the parameters of it. But that's what love is. Love is that feeling of wanting good things for the object of your love, and it has to be freely given. You cannot order somebody to love somebody else. The closest you can come to that is buy a puppy, and they will they will adore you just because they're inclined that way. They're very loving creatures. And as long as you don't as long as it's had a decent upbringing with its mom or a surrogate mother, then it should be very loving for others. The same is true with humans, by the way. The better our early development is, the more loving and connected we can be with others. And when there's abuse on a very young child, it damages the ability to love. And for those folks, it's really important to try to help them repair that damage. And it doesn't mean that they're defective in character. It's really no different. You wouldn't expect somebody with a broken leg to run a marathon. It just wouldn't be reasonable. And the same thing is true when something has damaged the brain. Then it's a damage. It needs to be repaired. It needs to be healed. And there is so much that we can do along those lines that I really wish we did a better job of it. And the point of the story of Passover is you were once slaves. Don't let somebody be ostracized. Don't let them be enslaved. Let's have freedom for everyone, because the other reality is when we have everybody contributing to society to the best of their ability, what a wonderful world that would be, because we would be getting the best of the best of the best. Everybody would be able to contribute, and we'd outpace the innovation and the healing that we're working at now would just take off logarithmically, factors of 10. It would be so much better. But instead we do infighting and hostility, and we resemble Amalek when we do that, when we think that one group is entitled to more than another group. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't reap the rewards of the work that you do. You should. It should be, but it should be merit-based. It's an interesting piece. Most people don't learn a whole lot about China. There was an empress, Wu Zetian, who people didn't like her ruling, partially because she came to power under very, very questionable methods. Let's put it that way. She was not a nice person. I'm not trying to whitewash her in any way. But the big thing that she did when she was empress was that she promoted people within her empire based on their skills and their merit, not who they were related to, not how wealthy they were, but on how well they could do the job. China actually is the first place that instituted, China and India, that part of the world, are the places where things like civil service exams actually started. They wanted people to be proficient in the arts and in the science and in thinking. Very interesting piece. But anyway, back to Wu Zetian. Because she used merit for promotion and for job filling, the people had food, they had security, they had all of the basic things they need. She was actually a very good emperor, even if her way of getting to the seat of power was less than ideal. And it was very wicked. I'm not trying to make her into an angel. So there's always good and evil on all sides. And I'm not going to say that the ends justifies the means. I don't think it does. I guess I'm a little bit Kantian in that. I think that it's really important to treat people with autonomy, to give people an opportunity to be their best selves. I don't think Wu Zetian did that. It was, more than a few millennia ago. It was many years, several hundred years ago, that she lived. And I don't know if it was a function of the time. I'm sure that had a contributing factor into it. Anyway, something you might want to look at Chinese empresses. There were a few of them, and she actually had a dynasty that she founded. So it happens, even in ancient history. But of course, most Americans don't learn that. We really don't learn in high school And even in early college, we don't learn that much about Africa and what goes on there other than as a source of slaves. A little bit maybe about Egypt because it plays into the biblical stories. We don't learn much of anything about Asia. Almost nothing about China, a little bit about Russia, mostly because of the split in the church, the East and West. But what we do learn about, we don't learn about South America. Very few Americans really understand that there's a huge, huge continent south of us and a large land bridge that connects us and South America, and that people have historically migrated up and down. One of the things that people don't understand about South America is before the conquistadors, before the Europeans came with their diseases and all of the other stuff they brought, the people living in South America actually had tremendous transportation. They had paved roads, they had irrigation, and guess what? They fed people. There were not people dying of starvation. That's not to say that there wasn't a lot of other really ugly and horrible things going on. There were. There's no time in history when there hasn't been horrible things, all the way back to Cain and Abel. You don't have to look very far. And I don't think that Cain intended to kill his brother. I think he just intended to hit him. But that, of course, when you don't know any better, you don't know what you don't know. But you can still damage and hurt something. And that's really powerful. So what's the lesson out of all that? Be aware that there's things you don't know. And not knowing what you don't know can harm somebody else. It's a hard lesson to realize. There's a line in Torah, in Scripture, that says, Chatati v'lo yadati. I sinned because I did not know it. And it talks to that. Now, it's actually, I take that back. It's not in Torah. It's in the story of David. Well, it might be elsewhere. But anyway, it's a big principle throughout Jewish Scripture, is to be aware that sin, that missing the mark, typically happens because there's big parts that you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And so the invitation is to be humble, to understand that there's more to learn, and to always be seeking to learn what you don't know, so that you can be a better you. So it all works around in a circle. So back to Passover, what do? Well, we have a Seder. And the Seder is an interesting piece. The Seder is not as old as some people think. I am sure that Jesus did not have a Seder for many, many reasons. One of which was that if you follow the timing of John actually shifts the time of the crucifixion. And he does that for a number of reasons. But he ascribes it to a Friday afternoon when the sheep are being slaughtered for the meal. So that would imply that Passover that year started on Friday night. And it wouldn't have started the night before the sheep are slaughtered, because it's kind of hard to eat them if they're still running around on their 4 feet. It's just a simple problem. But one of the problems in Christian Scripture is that each of the stories places it in a slightly different context. And so there's a number of stories running around before Christian Scriptures are canonized. And I'm not quite sure how and why the books got canonized with such big differences in them, but they did. And so it's one of the challenges. There are discrepancies like that. And I think that in Christian Scriptures, just as in Jewish Scriptures, when there are multiple stories like that, it's a way of teaching us that there's more than one way to understand a story. There's more than one way to understand an event. And that people will have those differences, and it doesn't make them wrong, it just makes them different. There is not just one right answer. There are 4 creation stories in the book of Genesis, for example. And it's not because that you have to somehow homogenize these stories. You don't. The truth is, we don't know. We weren't there. Neither was Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. John Oliver wasn't there. And neither was Cooper Anderson. Anderson Cooper, rather. None of those folks So we don't really know what happened. All we have is this kind of organic memory that's grown up, that cellular memory, for lack of a better word. And it's there to help shape us, to humble us, I think, and to help us appreciate and enjoy just the beauty of life, the miracle of it, and be the best we can be. But that does take humility. It doesn't take arrogance. And it's a hard balance. You help people the most when you are not, it's not about thinking low of yourself. It's about being open to new information. It's about seeking to know what you don't know. And it means exploring to find out how to grow, how to learn more. That, I hope, is something that everybody continues to do. Life certainly presents us with many, many opportunities to learn. And it's not about who's in and who's out. Yes, that served a survival kind of thing back when we were competing, marauding bands. But hopefully we've progressed beyond that. There is enough resource on this planet to take care of us. There is enough. And that's what we should want for people, is enough. Not too much, not enough for greed, but enough that everybody can have their basic needs met. If none of us gets greedy, then there is much, much more to share. And it was interesting. I was talking with somebody at my desk at Kaiser this past week about that food is something that we have to share. It isn't something that somebody should have under lock and key. And yes, I understand that some things are pricey and wonderful, and you might want to specifically enjoy some of those things. But basic food enough for people to survive, we should have a system where nobody's food insecure. And I don't think that's going to make people not work. I think if people know that their basic needs are met, that we can, as a culture, teach each other that means we have something to give back. And I admit that I was raised by my father, who said, you live in this country, it's a wonderful country, it's your country, and it gave you freedoms, it gave you the ability to harness what you want and need, and therefore you have a responsibility to give back. And that was the reason that I did my stint in the military, was a way of trying to give back. It's one of the reasons I did volunteer hours as I was growing up. I felt that I owed that to America and to the society. And so, yes, I guess I am embodying and living the teachings of my father of blessed memory. And I'm going to dedicate that actually to one of my brothers. There's a brother I have that I really never knew, because back in the day when there were divorces, you didn't know the other family. We weren't as connected as we are now with wonderful technologies like Zoom and Facebook and Instagram and all of those things, where people can be on a Zoom call in their car, which somebody was when we were gathering to remember my brother. But in his memory, and in my father's, may it be that we get it, that we are here to help each other, to be of service to each other, not to abuse and take advantage of each other. And I'm not saying that to be just some rose-colored glasses in the sky. I'm saying that as much to be selfish, as funny as that sounds. But I would like to live in a world where I didn't have to be afraid, where I didn't have to worry about somebody grabbing a gun and shooting up a bunch of people in a building, or in a field, or off the roof of a building. I would like to live in that world where we take care of people and don't let them fall through the cracks that way. That we don't have folks that feel they're so unentitled to basic survival needs that they have to take it from others. I think that we can do a better job of creating that safety net under each other. But it's going to take hard work. It's not easy. I think we can learn from each other some best practices. I know that I've talked to other shows about, for example, how German prisons are aimed at rehab, and we're just not. We are not aimed at that in America. We are aimed at warehousing people. And I find that to be sad and tragic, because that is a horrendous expense it runs between $30,000 and $50,000 a year to warehouse a prisoner. It costs the same kind of money in Germany to rehab that prisoner and to welcome them back into society, knowing they've repented and they've learned new skills and they now are a part of society. The big difference between the German prisons and ours is they really do teach the inmates life skills, how to interact with each other, how to control their anger, and they give them life and job skills so that they are marketable when they go out, when they're released. And they transition them, so it's not just oh, you're done, here's the door, welcome to freedom. Because that way the person is set up for failure. They just are. We do not have the net to come around. We have folks that are on the periphery of our society. We have those that are stragglers that Amalek can take advantage of. And are there hardened criminals in Germany? Yes, of course there are. There are people that are on the fringes, just because there are. And one of the things they do differently in Germany is that if they've got a young person who's committed a crime, a juvenile, that person does not end up with the hard criminals. They spend their term, their sentence in the juvenile facility even after they age out. So that the average age in the juvenile prison is really in the 20s, because it's people serving out the ends of their sentences. So it's a whole different system. It's a different way of looking at crime. It's a different way of looking at criminals. It's recognizing, and that's based on autonomy. That's because the first article in the German Constitution is that the autonomy of a human being is inviolable. And that means that you have to respect it. We don't have anything like that. Why does Germany have it? Because of the atrocities of Germany a little over 100 years ago. We're almost 100 years away from that. And it was such a horrendous, such atrocities were done, human against human, in so many ways, in the excuse of eugenics. And that's an excuse for abusing others. That's a judgment system that says, oh, you're more entitled to life than that person is. You're more entitled to breed than somebody else. That's not our decision to make. We don't know all the reasons why people are where they are, why they're different in this way or that way. But it is in the blending of all of those differences that we achieve the best strength. That makes us a composite, that makes us a mosaic of different individuals. And that's the beauty of art, and that's the beauty of humanity, is that we can be all those different folks and still contribute. That would be true freedom. If we got to recognizing that, that would be the real way to celebrate Passover, is to recognize the beauty and the loveliness of all human beings. Yes, keep ourselves safe from the folks that need some help, but provide help and don't just, put them away. That's not going to work. Warehousing is not going to work. We need to find ways to help that individual be a contributing person so that their self-esteem can come up, so that their self-value can come up. People need to have an opportunity to contribute and to be a meaningful part of society. We all need to feel significant. It gets down into basic human needs, and I know I've talked about that other times as well. We all need to know that we've got the basic things that we need to survive. We all need food. We all need something to shelter us from the elements. We need those basic things. We need to know that the walls are not going to cave in on us, because if that's going to happen, it's the only thing that we pay attention to. Thank you, Maslow, for the hierarchy of needs. One of the most basic ones is certainty that you're going to survive the next little bit. Once you have that, interestingly, you then want some variety in life. We've got other needs. We need variety. We need things to be different, not to be the same, not just a peanut butter and jelly sandwich every day for the rest of your life. I don't think there's anybody who'd want that. And our bodies are designed to eat different things. Back when we were hunter-gatherers, you didn't eat the same food every day. You ate what you could find, what you could gather, what you could hunt. So, yeah, we need variety. Another thing that we need is we need to feel that our life has meaning. Whether we're in pain for something or whether we're celebrating something, we still need to feel that there is a reason for our lives. We need that sense of significance. It's a valid human need. The last basic human need is love and connection. We need companionship. We need to feel that somebody wants us to be here. And the reality is that in life, others do want people to be here. Nobody should feel that that everybody wants them shoved off in a corner and they have no significance, no meaning, that there's no connection. Now, what if you are feeling alone? Then get out there and volunteer and do something. Connect yourself into the community. You will find friends. You will find like-minded people to help and grow the world. It's out there. There are organizations, and right now, candidly, a lot of those organizations are looking for people because we are not providing as much of it. I think that we've allowed the phone to become a surrogate for connecting. We've allowed, through the phone and social media, the ability to create a false sense of self and to let that false image connect with others. Perhaps that's a new form of idolatry. I hadn't thought about it that way, but in some ways it is. If you create something that isn't you and you interact that way, is that not a form of an idol of you? Self-idolatry. Ooh, what a thought. Hadn't even thought of it that way, but well, in some ways it is. There's a variety of labels we can put to many things. I think that when you create that false avatar, though, and you give it things beyond what's reasonable for a human being to be or do, that along with a sense of idolatry in that, it really reflects your sense of inadequacy. Because if you felt adequate, if you felt sufficient, if you loved yourself enough to love your neighbor, then you wouldn't need to put up the false avatar. You wouldn't need to present yourself as something other than who and what you are. All of us are perfectly human. That means we're going to make many, many mistakes every single day. If you can't own your mistakes, you can't grow. And growth is, to me, one of the big things we're here to do. And I don't just mean growth in my in my mid-measurement. That's not necessarily the one I want to grow. It's the one in my heart and the one in my head. Because when I do that, that's when I am able to give the best that I can. That's when I can recognize that I have enough to share. And that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean I shouldn't eat well. I should. I should be able to eat just fine, but I need to be considerate about others and make sure that nobody else is starving. Because when I do that, then I take away some of the strife, some of the unrest, and I can raise the bar for everyone as to what is acceptable. And when we get to the place of having people know that we care about each other, we are not in an amoeba eating amoeba kind of existence, that we're not out to just steal things from each other, then we can hopefully start to reach out and start to grow things. I don't think we're anywhere close to that right now, candidly. I think we've got a long ways to go. I think we've got some good ideas, and we need to work together. There is a strength in cooperation. There's a strength in partnership. There is a real validity in networking, but networking not just to move yourself up, but to move the whole web upward. Because, again, when you do that, you are automatically higher as well. You don't get left behind. And I think that's an important lesson. And that, again, is part of the idea of Passover. I'm going to bring it back around. Because if we are really free, that comes with a responsibility. It comes with the responsibility to not have stragglers, to not let people fall prey to Amalek. It all is interconnected, whether it's through having fun at Purim or remembering the journey through the difficult spaces, because that's the other part of Passover. There are several things that we are enjoined to do for Passover. One is to eat matzah, to actually eat the bread that is the bread of affliction, the simple flour and water, the basis of survival, in order to have the least nutritious food, but one that sustains you and allows you to live, matzah. So everybody should have some of that. That, again, is a way of sharing it. The other thing that we are required to do is to tell our stories of coming out of Mitzrayim, out of the tight places. So it's not just about the liberation from Egyptian slavery to Pharaoh, but it's also about the tight places in our own lives. Each of us has some kind of difficulties that have hurt us along the way, whether it's a physical, a mental, a societal issue. We've all conquered things. And in the telling of the story of how we conquered our weaknesses, our challenges, our difficulties, a hurricane, whatever, any of those, we can empower and inspire others to recognize that they can overcome their challenges as well. That's why we share stories. We share them to help each other, to help ourselves, to help us process what happens in our lives, but also to empower those who are listening to us. Because when we do that, then we, again, help society be better. So those are among the important things. It is, of course, couched in the form of the Seder. And why do I say that changed? Because with the destruction of the temple in 60 of the Common Era, 67 to 70 CE, then the lambs were no longer slaughtered the Pesach. So we can't have that. But we can have bitter herbs to remember the pain of slavery and oppression. That's another one of the things that we're supposed to do. But we changed how and what we did, because people didn't walk their sheep to the temple for slaughtering, to be humanely slaughtered, folks, and the blood collected. It's not about the blood, though. I always find that fascinating, that Christians think that this is a celebration of blood. It's not. It's barely mentioned in a sentence or two in passing. And it's just one of the plagues, and it's barely mentioned. It's just not there. So what is it about? Again, it's about freedom, and it's about telling your story. Why did it become the Seder that we have today? Well, the rabbis, with the destruction of the temple, looked around and they said, what can we do in order to help people remember the story, to tell each other the story for Pesach? Can't have the standard traditional Passover meal because one of the elements is missing, namely the meat. So let's change it. And they looked around to Zoroastrians in the Far East, who celebrate spring and the Nowruz festival, and they took from it the plate of spring vegetables. It's a spring festival, rebirth. And they looked to the Roman Symposium as an educational format where people could sit around and tell the stories and talk to each other and practice being free, with the reclining and the leaning and the pillows, very Roman. And they blended those things together into the Seder that we have now. So here's my piece to everyone. Yes, we are having a community Seder. Please do go on the website and register for that, or give me a call or contact the temple. Any of those work. And but here's the piece. Even if you read from the first word on page 1 to the last word on the last page out of the Haggadah, the book that we read, which means the telling, even if you read every word of that, you have not fulfilled the requirement of the Seder, because the requirement is to tell your own story of your own trials, that you might help somebody face theirs. And we couch that in terms of, how did you come out of your tight place? How did you come out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt? And so the important thing is to tell the story. And that's a community sharing kind of event, and that's what the Seder is about. So we'll cover that. By the way, the Eitz Chayim Passover celebration is typically about an hour until we get to the meal. We start at 6. We eat 7, give or take a minute or two, and it's a delicious full ritual meal for $36. So you're welcome to that. Less for kids, obviously. So, yeah, if you're interested in that, please do give us a call. Please connect on the website. The website is not quite ready for registration yet. Give us another week, and it will be. So hopefully get the new website up in that time. So this has been Ask a Rabbi, and everybody's been very quiet. You're welcome to give us a call at 772-340-1590 and ask me a question right here online if you'd like to. And
a lot of the things that you talk about on this show are things that a lot of us have never heard before. Therefore, a question is welcome every now and then,
It is. And, this is Ask a Rabbi, so please do consider that. The other thing that I'll mention is that we're looking for sponsors. If you'd like to sponsor, if you've enjoyed listening to this bit of radio or Facebook or YouTube or any of the different ways that WPSL reaches out to the world as the talk of the Treasure Coast, please feel free to sponsor. You can call that same number, that's 772-340-1590, and ask to talk to Carol or Greg, and they'll help you set up a sponsorship to sponsor one or more episodes of Ask a Rabbi. If you do that, I'll talk about your business, your interest, whatever it is, and we'll certainly thank you and mention you on the show, because I can do that too. Yeah. So it is traditional to have an unleavened bread, and yes, you can find those in the store. And this is the only holiday where we do that. I love that the supermarkets all put out matzah for Hanukkah. No, it's not. Matzah is for this period, and the displays should be up or coming up very, very shortly, or they're not going to be out in time for Passover. Passover this year is the beginning of April. It starts on, I believe, a Monday night. I'm dealing with memory. I can't get to my phone right now and verify that. But it's easy to find. You can Google First Night Seder.
Unleavened bread.
Yeah.
Isn't that basically structurally pretty much the same mixture as a pizza crust?
It is similar. It's just flour and water.
Flour and water.
Flour and water. Sometimes people throw a pinch of salt in, but that's about it.
Okay.
It's flour and water, and the big thing about it is that you have 18 minutes from the time the water hits the flour until the bread is baked. Oh. And that's why it doesn't... Somebody in ancient times decided 18 minutes is how long it takes for the yeast to start to form and cause the bread to rise. Oh. So the requirement is unleavened bread that has not had a chance to rise. And you can buy it now in boxes because it ships most easily as little squares in little square boxes. That's a shipping accommodation, and the way the boxes are packed is to try to minimize the amount of crumbling and breaking. The old big round ones kind of jumbled around in the box, and they break very easily. I can remember more than once shipping a box of the round ones and opening it up and having breadcrumbs basically. So, and that it's not just about eating the matzah; it's about not eating leavened bread. So not even graham crackers, not not saltines. It's take matzah with you, and be careful when you look on the box. It'll tell you what year it was made for, and it will tell you whether or not it is for Passover use. I've had a few times where people have tried to walk into the temple with a box and it's clearly labeled not for Passover use. That means it wasn't made under the strict auspices. For example, if you buy the everything matzah, which has got all kinds of wonderful spices and things in it, they can't make that in the 18 minutes. And so it's not for Passover. But it's tasty. The matzah companies, the matzah manufacturers want to sell matzah all year round, not just for a month in the year for use of the 1 week. But it also affects a lot of other things. It affects ice cream. It affects just about everything because we don't pay attention to how things are mixed in. I will say one thing that European Jews started being strict about something called kitniot. Kitniot means small things. And they didn't want the non-Jews who didn't understand the rules and regulations of Passover to think that Jews were disregarding the requirements by eating cornbread. Corn is not mentioned in Scripture. Don't tell me that the dream had corn. Corn is the British word for grain. So it really was barley or oats or something of that ilk, probably just wheat or barley, that Pharaoh's talking about in the dream. It's not stalks of yellow corn, because that nobody in the Near or Far East recognized that until we got to America and maize was growing here. They called it corn because that's the word for grain.
Right. Okay.
So cornbread is not mentioned. It's not one of the restricted things. But the rabbis in Europe didn't want the non-Jews to think that Jews were ignoring it. And so they forbid many other substances, legumes and things like that, because they could be used to bake. And the impression would be that therefore we were eating non-unleavened, if that makes any sense. But today you can buy cakes and brownies and cookies and all those kinds of things that are certified for Passover because they're made with funky flour or potato starch or one of those things. Potatoes are very popular because they're nice and starchy. They make a good food for Passover.
Seeing a lot of plant-based meat products now.
Yes, we are. And those are wonderful. I love those. I think they're pretty cool. Some of those might be acceptable for Passover, some are not. Just because it's not meat doesn't mean it's not leavened. It's a much more difficult thing to look for. Look for the OU with a P on it, or the word saying used for Passover. That's just the safe way to shop for this holiday. And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb, and you can hear that music coming underneath me. That means we've got 1 minute less. Yeah.
Well, we can tell everybody where the temple's located.
The temple is at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. It's the front building in the front, right next to the elevators. If you're facing the elevators, we're the one on the right. And you're welcome to join us there Friday nights at 7:30. This Friday is Dress Up Friday. Come and be dressed up. Next Friday, we are not meeting at the temple. We are going to do Shabbat under the stars. And please call the temple for the location on that.
Okay, I guess you've done it again.
I have. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb for Congregation Eitz Chayim. This is Ask a Rabbi on WPSL.
You're listening to WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast and webcaster to the world.